Hello and welcome back to part 2 of the Lindworm on Stories for Men with me, Marcus Pibworth. If you haven't already listened to part 1, then I would urge you to go back and listen to that first, and then the story and the conversations will make a lot more sense. And if you have already listened, then welcome back. If you're getting value out of this, I would urge you to go and have a look at my Buy Me a Coffee page where you can support my work, and also to subscribe to my newsletter on my website, and then you can stay up to date with upcoming Stories for Men sessions that you could be a part of. But for now, let's go back and let's find out what is happening in the palace and the world of the Lindworm with part 2. There it is. For us, not much time seems to have passed, but in this kingdom, a lot of time has passed. Many years. The king, he came back from battle victoriously, and him and the queen raised that boy into a fine young prince, trained in the way of the sword and the way of the court, until one day, when he came of age, the king called him into the main hall, the great hall, and he said, "Son, now is the time. You have come of age and you must go leave the kingdom in search of a bride. It is time you married." And the prince was very excited by this. The next morning, with his entourage, he had a beautiful white carriage led by 6 fine white horses. And him and the entourage left his father's palace, and they rode over the land until they got close to the edge of the kingdom. And there, standing in the path, was something none of them had ever seen before, towering above them. "A bride for me before a bride for you." A great, big, black, scaly Lindworm. "Once more a bride for me before a bride for you. Elder brothers marry first." The prince was terrified. He turned that party around and they headed out to find a different exit from the kingdom. They rode and rode as fast as they could until they got to another path leading out of the kingdom. And once again, there it was, "A bride for me before a bride for you. Elder brothers marry first." This time, the prince ordered the entourage to turn around and they headed straight back to the palace. The prince ran in to the great hall to his father. "King, my father!" And he relayed the story of this giant serpent. The king had no idea what was going on. He said, "Maybe we should go and ask your mother." And so the king and his son, the prince, ran through the stone corridors of the palace into the queen's chambers. "Mother, queen, mother!" And once more he told the story of this Lindworm to his mother. And the prince and the king saw as the queen's face paled and dropped. "It is true. I know what it is. Before you were born, I gave birth to a Lindworm and I threw it out the window and I hoped that would be the last of it. But now it is back. And it is true, as is the way of our kingdom. Elder brothers must marry first." Now the king just did not know what to do. He paced up and down in his room, And then he decided. He sent messengers off to far-off kingdoms, all asking for a princess to marry his son, the prince. Of course, he omitted to say which son and which prince. Now, very soon, a king sent his princess his daughter, the princess, to the kingdom to marry, unaware of what lay ahead. When this princess arrived, the king and queen took her aside and they said, "As is the way of our kingdom, you will not meet the bridegroom until the day of the wedding." So it was only as that poor young girl stood at the altar that she first looked up at this giant serpent, breathing heavily. She could feel its scaly tail wrapping around her ankle. After the ceremony was over, the Lindworm led her through the palace corridors to the bridal chamber. They went in, and the door closed behind them. Oh, that was a long night, a long, long night. Nobody slept worse than the king and the queen. When morning came, the king and the queen tentatively ran through the corridors until they got to the chamber door. They pushed it open slowly. They stared inside. And there they saw on the bed, writhing around bigger than the night before, the terrifying Lindworm. And there was no sign of his bride. It was clear to all that she had been devoured. Now, some time passed. The Lindworm was gone. And the king thought, enough time has passed that I must send my son again to find a bride. And so once more the young prince set off with his entourage. Once more, as they reached the edge of the kingdom, "A bride for me before a bride for you." This time the prince did not stick around. He ran straight back to the palace, straight to his father to tell him what had happened. Again, the king sent off messengers to further away kingdoms. And again, after some time, a king sent his daughter to marry the prince. Again, they told her that you would not meet your bridegroom until the day of the wedding. Again, the first time she saw him was standing at the altar, staring up, horrified. Again, after the ceremony, the Lindworm led her through to the bridal chamber. And again, a long night passed. Once more, when the king and queen opened the door in the morning, they were met by the sight of the writhing Lindworm. And once more, no bride. Now, I'd like to say that is the end of that part of the story, but it is not. This process happened over and over and over again until no king in his right mind would send his daughter to marry. For they all knew what was happening. They had heard the rumours and they knew this meant certain death. But the king had a problem. He still needed to marry his eldest son first. What could he do? Again, he paced up and down in his chamber. And then he remembered a shepherd, a loyal shepherd that lived at the edge of his kingdom. He remembered that that shepherd had a beautiful daughter. He thought, I will go and ask this shepherd to give his daughter in marriage. And so he set off. Imagine that shepherd's surprise as he saw the king strolling across the fields towards his humble cottage. My loyal shepherd, I request that you give me your daughter's hand for my son. Well, the shepherd had heard what was happening At the palace, he said, Your Majesty, this cannot be. She is my only daughter. I love her, and she is who will look after me in my old age. Please, I cannot give her to you. Give me your daughter. Desperate now, the king changed his tune. And what could a peasant do in the face of a king? The shepherd was forced to admit defeat and agree to the king's terms. The king left. After some time, the shepherd's daughter arrived home. The shepherd broke the news to her. Oh, it was awful. Imagine. She ran from the house and she fled. She ran across the fields and she got once more to the forest and she ran around screaming, crying. Out of the trees came this bent over old woman. Why so doleful, my dear? What ails you? Oh, nothing you can help me with, said the peasant's daughter. Oh, why don't you try me? And so the shepherd's daughter told her of her fate, what lay ahead with the Lindworm. Well, why didn't you say so? For I can put this right in a twinkling. When you get to the palace, what you need to do is ask the king and queen to place in the bridal chamber a tub of lye for scrubbing, a tub of fresh milk, as many whips as a young boy can carry in his arms. And you must also, before you arrive at the palace, sew yourself 10 shirts, 10 wedding shifts, to wear one over the other. On the night of your wedding, when the Lindworm asks you to remove one of your shifts, you must refuse until he removes one of his skins first. Repeat this process until you have no layers left. Grab a whip, dip it in the lye, whip the Lindworm, and after that, bathe him in milk. And finally, most importantly, pick him up, take him to the bed and embrace him. Embrace him, thought the shepherd's daughter. That seems to be the worst part of it all. We will leave the shepherd's daughter with the advice of the old woman ringing in her head. We'll leave her on the eve of marriage and come back together. Once more, let's take a deep breath together. And one more. And now once more, when you feel called, speak what images lay inside of you, what frustrates you, what excites you.
I hadn't thought about the Lindworm as a him till this part of the story. Also, like, what's his motive? Like, he wants a bride, but then he keeps eating them.
Yeah, I was surprised he was so traditional, the Lindworm. Still, the firstborn gets married first.
He kind of gets carried away eating too, just like his mom did.
And it made me wonder which one of you two is the eldest, Marcus or Jonty.
Marcus, he's getting married first. He's the Lindworm.
Watch your appetite.
For me, it was interesting. The whole the girls, the princesses getting eaten up. It made me angry at the king, and the queen. The queen seems strangely absent now in this part of the story. and I wonder why that is. But it made me angry at the king, and it made me connected with a lot of what I see in, at least in my country. I see this a lot, where parents really justify the behavior of their sons a lot, bad behavior. And so it made me connected with that, and it made me angry. Wow, this person is eating them. It's not like they can go. They die apparently.
Yeah.
So yeah. But they kept lying to whoever they were asking their daughter for, and or lying or not telling the truth.
Yeah.
And that bugged me.
Because they never have a different solution.
Yeah.
It's like they know what happened last time. Maybe this time it will be different, but we've done nothing to change it.
And also just looking at other people's relationships as well, and like sometimes it's easier to see other people's relationships like that and thinking, oh yeah, how often am I the king, sort of sending off for something that I know is going to end badly and not really changing my actions. And I find that interesting, that sort of pattern that it can really be hard to break.
I thought it was strange that they didn't come up with another plan than just to find other brides, and then eventually to go to this poor shepherd. That's, to me, that indeed that was made me more angry than all the other brides. I think because it's more abuse of power in that sense, making using his privilege to his own advantage. I don't think that's right. And I think there were more options. I mean, you can, I don't know, maybe you can try to kill the Lindworm, or you could try to negotiate and try to understand the needs of this Lindworm. And I don't know. I mean, there are so many different ways to go about it, I think, than to rather say like, oh, we must throw more women at the Lindworm.
You have no choice.
Yeah. But that makes me think about, I mean, something interesting is, I think the way they're always looking for something really far away, and we have to have the solution to the problem is going to be sending for a further away princess, like further and further away to different kingdoms. And then the first sort of change in this pattern is when like he's looking closer. We don't know what's going to happen closer, but it really sort of makes me laugh when I think about it in terms of my own life, sort of how many times I've literally physically moved countries thinking that the answer to what I'm looking for is the other side of the world, or, looked for sort of drugs or alcohol or relationships or something to as that sort of external, far away thing that's going to solve all the problems. And maybe it's sort of time to start looking closer to home, somewhere within my own kingdom, although trying not to take a shepherd's daughter down with me.
You might have to take a whipping though.
Yeah, and threaten him and take her. Like, look closer, yes, but also then threaten the solution. That was funny. I thought it was funny. The younger brother was funny for me because, at least so far, and this is where it also sits with me for the absence of the mother now, and I guess what you were saying, Marcus, with looking for a solution outside of us, because there's such a clear absence of anyone giving any sort of love or trying to talk to the Lindworm, right? And up until, I guess, with the shepherd's daughter who's learning, and that's the part of the story, I guess. But yeah, it's very interesting that there is they sort of obey this dictum that the elder brother must get married first, even multiple times, which is very, very funny, very weirdly funny. But nobody actually tries to have a relationship with the elder brother in any way, with the son, except just getting him married, because that's the norm.
And it doesn't seem like anyone else has a say apart from the king. Because at the beginning, it was all about the little brothers being trained up like a prince. He's like a warrior, meant to be, I don't know, I can't remember what it said, but quite intelligent and have a role. And then as soon as this all happens, he just comes running back. And then there's like the king power, just he decides everything. And there's obviously no mention of anyone else having a say. And suddenly everything we learnt about the brother training and growing has just disappeared. Don't know.
Actually, not in that moment. With the first time that he ran back to the palace, I thought it was funny that the king didn't have the answer. I was like, maybe we should ask mommy.
True. And now they found out it's her fault. But she has no say.
Yeah.
I'm really interested in kind of the solution here with the whips and the milk and the lard. That's a cool. That's an interesting combination. That's interesting methods. It doesn't sound like it's intended to kill. It sounds like it's intended to strip something away and revitalize something, because we kind of have this blameless creature in a way, that's the product of an infraction of the rules of eating rose petals. Yeah. So, I mean, it seems right that the Lindworm shouldn't, it's like the Lindworm has certainly caused suffering, but he's sort of blameless. He's sort of like, does he deserve to be vanquished, though? It's kind of like, what do you do with the monsters you created?
I mean, that's a really interesting point that a few people brought up, and I haven't. Yeah, I mean, I think it's quite rare, and in an example of a story like this where no one comes up and says, right, let's just kill it. Like, I mean, you would think that would be in a tale like this, in a palace with knights, and that would be one of the first things, but it never seems to come up as a suggestion, and that's an interesting thing to ponder, isn't it?
Maybe it's the family connection, something the guilt. But also it's quite nice with the shepherd and his daughter, that I guess like the different, I don't know if it's to do with like the different classes, but obviously when they send a letter to the other palaces and kingdoms, the king just sends his daughter away. Obviously they're not meant to have heard it, but then a king goes to a shepherd to force her or force his hand, and he doesn't want anything to do with it. And then even the daughter seems to have some sort of say in that. She runs away screaming instead of just following instructions. It's quite nice. And then potentially finds herself a solution, as opposed to just being a girl that gets sent wherever she's told.
Yeah.
Maybe different.
And the solution coming from the old woman again, who I wonder if it's the same witch from the beginning of the story, who gives her this solution, and in that case, whether she had a long-term plan of years, like I will spend 20 years of my life hatching this plan. But yeah, no, I wonder though seriously if it's the same person, which it seems like, who has the solution, and and what that means. But there is the wisdom of the old woman getting passed on to a younger girl. I think there's that element to it. And then, and that girl in what she brings to this creature who has a man hidden somewhere inside him, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting question.
On that point, the fact that the queen never thought to go and seek the witch, who obviously told her not to eat the 2 flowers. She ate them. Something bad happened, and never considered maybe she's got a solution as well. She's kind of been discounted, the queen.
That's an interesting point, isn't it? And I think that comes up quite with a lot of these wise characters in the stories. The story we had last month, The Speedy Messenger, it's sort of similar in the way that, and this sort of old woman, she tells the solution to the problem, but she also seems to have the solution to the next problem. So it's like, did she some way concoct this situation in the first place as a trial? Does she already know that of course she's going to eat the flowers, so then already know that, and at some point I'm going to have to give some advice of what happens when a Lindworm's born? And as in The Speedy Messenger, we had there's a bit at the beginning where little Semyon meets the 2 hermits, and they say, and he says, I want to be a soldier in the king's army, and they say, don't be a soldier, you're going to have a hard life and you will be kidnapped by a sea king and held prisoner. And then sort of later on in the story, he gets kidnapped and held prisoner by a sea king. And so these wise people they already know the problem, and I think that's sort of interesting in itself. So you listen to the wise person, but the wise person sort of has already knows that you're not going to listen to them.
But like, it kind of like how would the witch of the forest have responded if it was the queen coming to her, the person who had made this mistake, hadn't followed the instructions, versus sort of someone who's this helpless victim of, someone else's mistake that she had a hand in, enabling instructions or not?
And also, we always sort of hear the worst case scenarios, and there's 1,000 other stories where the queen goes back, she picks one flower, goes to bed, has a baby, and we never hear anything more of it. And it's only this one queen that has done it differently. So yeah, that'll be the next version I tell, the 15-minute version. And there we shall leave part 2 of The Lindworm. Thank you for joining us. How did you find it? What was the story like? Did any of it seem to reflect your own life? Did you relate to some of the characters? Did you find frustrating parts? And what about the discussion? Did you hear anything to add? Did you agree or disagree with anything? Please do join in the conversation on social media or by emailing me. Once again, please do visit my Buy Me a Coffee page to support my work, and look at my website for information of upcoming events, and do subscribe to my newsletter, and then you will be informed of any sessions, especially Stories for Men sessions, that you could be a part of yourself. Okay, well anyway, we'll leave the the shepherd's daughter, sorry, not the princess. We'll leave her. And please do come back soon for part 3 of The Lindworm. Goodbye.